That's true. Yep. That's the side door. That's the side door. Bum, bum, ba-da-dum, bum, 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 ba-dum, ba-da-dum, bum, 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 bum. Da-dee, da-dee, da-dee. Ken Monroe. Dad, is that you?
Yes, it is.
Excellent.
Did you just ask Ken Monroe if he was dead?
No, there's Dad, there's Ken, and there's my dad. There's Ken. Ken is back on the moon. Good to see you, Ken.
Well, actually, you can't tell where I am. I could be on a satellite, actually. In this one.
I don't know. I feel like you had to be on the moon. You're right. It could be. It could be
We may
the
need your
space station. It could be the
mine
space.
is low power.
It could be the space station.
I've been catching you on YouTube, actually.
Oh yeah. Did you notice Lois's iPhone? It says you at the beginning of almost all videos. It says Lois's iPhone for several minutes, and then finally it comes on. My son Shirley does it mostly. I think he does it to test me to see if what he can do.
I'm sure there are ways to fix it if he.
Yes, there are. He knows what they are. He knows exactly what they are.
What does
He likes the chaos.
I don't know, it
He
just
likes
says low.
So I just wanted you guys to see that our posse is here, our crew is here, our studio audience, the chevra is here. There's Jason, David, Liz, and Lynn. You can come down. There are lots of tickets available for weekly showings. But they only I've been told, like at these fancy network shows, that they have these people, they only let the beautiful people sit in front where you can see them. And so that so far everybody here is beautiful people. That's why they get to sit up front. But I can't guarantee what happens to everybody else. Okie dokie. All right. So this week's parsha is Chayei Sarah. And I'm going to read you something. It's very surprising. It's very surprising to me. Even though I've seen it many times, it still surprises me. This is at the very beginning of Parshas Chayei Sarah, at the Torah portion of Chayei Sarah. And it starts off, V'yu Chayei Sarah, Mea Shana V'esrim Shana V'sheva Shanim. And the life of Sarah was 127 years. Shnei Chayei Sarah, those are the years of Sarah. But Thomas Sarah died. Bekiryat Arba, in Kiryat Arba, he Hebron, Be'eretz Canaan, which is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. Vayavo Avram, lispod l'Sarah, v'liv kota. And Avram came to eulogize Sarah and to cry for her. Vayakam Avram mi'al meso, and then Avram rose from before his dead. Vayidaber b'nei Ches lemor, and he spoke to the people of Ches. So he's talking about him. He wants to bury his dead. He tells them, he goes into negotiations. There's stuff back and forth. Money's mentioned. And then it goes on to, he purchases the land, he gets the double cave, and then it says, Va'achrei kein kovar Avram es Sarah ishto. And afterwards, Avram buried Sarah, his wife, El Maras de Machpelah Pnei Mamre hi Chevron Beretz Canaan. At the cave, a double cave at the field on the plains of Mamre, which is Chevron in the land of Canaan. So in what I just read, to me was something very surprising. I'm going to just show you that there are bookends in this week's Torah portion. The bookends are the death of Sarah and the death of Avram. It begins with the death and burial of Sarah, and it ends sort of basically with the death and burial of Avram. So when it talks about Avraham at the end of the parsha, it says Vayigva vayamas Avram b'seva tova zakein v'savea v'yesaf elamav. So Avram died at a good ripe old age, satisfied, and he was gathered unto his people. V'yikburu also Yitzchak v'yishmael banav el maras hamachpelah stei mareh, and they buried him. They buried him in the same, Yitzchak and Yishmael, his son, at the same cave, the double cave at the field of Ephraim and Zoar. Asad Shekana Avram Meis B'nei Ches, the very same place. Sham Kubar Avram v'Sara Ishto. There is buried Avraham and Sarah, his wife. Are you as surprised as I am?
How old was he?
I think 175. Yeah, 175.
I'm waiting for the surprise.
It was in there.
Wait, what?
It was right there. I read it to you.
Wait. She died, buried in the cave. He died, buried in the cave.
Yes.
All right.
You just say that like it's just, you just say that. I'll tell you what is surprising to me.
All right.
Here's what's
Not
surprising.
that it happened, but that the language is.
Yeah, it's surprising language. I'll tell you, it's surprising language. The reason it's surprising language is because if somebody asked you, what are you? Let's say somebody asked you, what are you? What would you say?
Flesh and blood.
Okay. Flesh and blood. Okay. A lot of people would say flesh and blood, I think. Would we, as educated Jews, say flesh and blood, though?
No.
No.
What would we say?
I am a Jew. I am a
A Jew? Okay.
I am a man. I am
Okay,
a human being. I am a father.
Okay. Not quite getting to where I want to go. What I would say, if I had, I would say that I am a soul enclosed in a body. That's what I would say. All those are not bad answers, but I would say I'm a soul enclosed in a body. I remember once watching a movie where they used a particular metaphor. It may have been a movie by the Mormons. I don't know. I was in a hospital somewhere and they showed this movie, but I'm pretty sure it was a Mormon movie. But shortly after watching that movie, one of my kids told me that they were afraid of being buried. They were afraid of being buried.
Claustrophobia.
Right. It's and the idea that their body's going to be in a cemetery, that was a frightening idea. So I used the metaphor for the movie. Okay. The metaphor for the movie was you come in from the outside, you take off your coat, you put it in the closet, you close the door. Now you walk away. Are you afraid? Why would I be afraid? my child asks. Well, your coat's in the closet. So what? I'm not in the closet.
Now I know why my kids never close the closet door.
Yeah, so in other words, if in fact I am a soul enclosed in a body, then when it comes time to take off my body and put it in the ground, it is not much different than putting a coat in the ground or putting a coat in the closet. In other words, my awareness, my self-awareness will not be in my body. My self-awareness will travel wherever my spirit goes, wherever my soul goes. This is I think that this is how many people would characterize it. I've seen this even in sort of learned discussions about the nature of a person, that our awareness resides in our soul, and our awareness, even if there might be degrees of awareness, but that we existed as a self-aware being before we were born. We exist as a self-aware being after we die, and for the most part, that is who we are. So if that's the case, let's say you make that assumption. Again, it's a simple assumption. Let's say you make that assumption, then there's something wrong with the wording here, because it says that Avram and Sarah are buried in the cave. The Torah is saying, or afterwards, Avram buried Sarah, his wife, in the cave. He didn't bury Sarah. He buried Sarah's body, but he didn't bury Sarah. Sarah's not in the cave. And then according to that explanation, and then over here, when it says, Shama Kubar Avram v'Sarah Ishto, there is buried Abraham and Sarah, his wife. They're not buried there. Sarah and Abraham are in the next world. They're not in the ground. If it is true that I'm a soul, and that my body is just like a wrapping or a container for my soul, then how do you make sense of this language? This language suggests otherwise. This language suggests that Avram and Sarah are buried somewhere. And language is very important in the Torah. You know, you would expect if we were going to if it was the case that we are souls wrapped in bodies, that's what we are, that we'd get some hint to it from the verses.
Could you argue what's buried?
Avram and Sarah, his wife.
Well, okay. Would you argue the body of Abraham and Sarah is buried, or?
Well, I could say that the body of Avram and Sarah, but it says Avram and Sarah.
So
It says Avram and Sarah are there.
does that mean their soul is buried there?
Right. So
That's what it's.
here's a thing which we bump into at this point, which is one of the exhibits in the Museum of Things You Would Expect to Find in the Torah but Do Not. Amongst those things that you would expect to find in the Torah but do not is a discussion of the human soul. I once read one of those books, like, I don't remember if it was The Sword of Constantine, or it was a book like that one of those kind of books where it was one of those kind of conspiracy theory books throughout history, that uncovers some kind of secret of history and has all sorts of proof to it. So in one of those books, it said that Jews actually do not believe in the soul. I forgot why they were saying it. I think they were saying that specifically that the Jews that were on top of Masada, they must have been Gnostics with a G, because Jews don't believe in the existence of a soul. So, and there was reference, I guess, in Josephus's record of the last speech. I don't know how he got exclusive rights to the last speech on Masada, but somehow he got he heard about the speech, and apparently in the speech it mentions the soul, and it couldn't be that these were practicing Jews, because Jews don't believe in the soul. And you could imagine that there's somebody reading through the Torah, he's looking for, where does it talk about the nature of the soul in the Torah? He doesn't find it. I don't know if that's where they got it, that Jews don't believe in the soul, but it does say, and God blew into man's nostrils the breath of life, and he lived, and the words neshama and nefesh are present in that verse, and that's in chapter 2.
How would one bury one's soul? You can't. Or can you?
I don't think so.
Where's the famous phrase in there? Hashem Nishmat Adam.
Ner Hashem Nishmat Adam.
Where does that come from?
Ner Hashem Nishmat Adam. It's not in the 5 books, but it is somewhere.
Some mysteries coming in. Mystery.
Well, I think just besides, the blowing into Adam, that is the phrase that pops into my head.
The problem is they come here and haven't eaten dinner.
So I argue that is Salah. Tweaky Salah.
Crumbs all over.
Mishlei. Proverbs. It's not actually the one in Proverbs. The actual one is in chapter 20, verse 27. Ner Hashem nishmat Adam. So it's in Proverbs chapter 20, 27. But when we speak of the soul, we speak of neshama or nefesh, ruach, and these terms all are present, at least neshama and nefesh are present in the creation, the formation of man. Vayitzer Hashem Elokim et Adam afar min adama, and God fashioned man from the dust of the Adama, of the earth. V'yipach be'apav nishmat chayim, and he blew into his nostrils the breath of life. V'yihi Adam lenefesh chaya, and man became a living being. So there, in mystical writings, especially more contemporary ones, there's all sorts of talk about the soul and that there are different aspects of the soul, and maybe even different types of souls. There's becomes a matter of great study and almost science of the spirit. But the basic notion of the soul is derived from there. It's that at the beginning, it's some kind of animating spirit. He, Adam nefesh chaya, the person, the human became a living being, so it's an animating force. But then it ends up having more character. And in mystical writings, which again have become almost available to everybody, and especially in the teachings of the Tanya that are taught to almost everybody, but also in many books written nowadays, contemporary books about the mystical. So we're told that the soul has an aspect called neshama, which derives from this breath that's blown into it, an aspect called nefesh, which is there's a model that was given by Rabbi Isaac Luria, and the model is of a glass blower. He said when a glass blower, he breathes into a pipe, and at the end of the pipe there's molten glass. So he's got the molten glass, and he has a tool to help sort of fashion the molten glass. So when he blows in the initial breath, when it comes from his mouth into the pipe, that he says is neshima, that's breath. So that would be neshama. So imagine God is the glass blower. So the first breath, the beginning, as it comes from God, that is neshima, that's neshama. And then as it travels down the pipe, that's ruach, that's wind, because that's like breath in motion. So the wind. So as it's moving down the pipe, that's ruach. And as it rests in the glass, that helps form the molten glass, that helps form what eventually the receptacle part of whatever happens, that's called nefesh. And so nefesh, we're told, is the lower aspect of the soul, the part that is closest to the physical, that sort of interacts with the physical. The ruach is higher, maybe it's related to emotions, and neshama is higher than that, and maybe that's related to ideas and thoughts and stuff. Neshama might be housed in the mind, and the ruach might be housed in the heart, and the nefesh might be housed in the kidneys. And then we're told that there are even two other aspects of the soul that are way higher than this, that are called chaya and yechida, that there could be 5 aspects of the soul. There's a 5-aspect model, there's a 3-aspect model, and all sorts of discussion. And Aryeh Kaplan in one place says that most of our awareness happens from the nefesh part of our soul. Every once in a while, we can sort of rise up and see the world from the ruach part of our soul, of our soul, so that it's like a kind of higher vision. Also, when you go to sleep, Moshe Chaim Luzzatto says, when you go to sleep, there's certain aspects of your soul that separate. They have like they can wander a little bit, because while you're asleep, you don't need that much of your soul to be present. So these other aspects wander a bit in the spiritual world, and that accounts for certain dreams that you have, mystical dreams that you have, because your soul is like moving around in places. And every once in a while, you get a flash of awareness that comes from something that was going on with those aspects of your soul. And there's just, and then this thing I was talking about in the beginning, that the soul somehow exists before you're born, and that it's going to continue to exist afterwards. And according to the Rambam, life of the soul in a kind of paradise, that is the final stage of human development. That the final stage of human development is the soul alone in some kind of blissful environment with the pronounced light of God shining, etc. But the Rambam is not the only opinion about that. In fact, he doesn't really represent Now he does not represent the majority. He doesn't seem to represent what we would call the mainstream when it comes from the understanding of what eventually happens with the human being. There is something, this is a principle which he also agrees with. He considers it one of the main principles of Jewish life, and that is called resurrection of the dead. Exactly what resurrection of the dead is not clear. It is, but in some manner or form, soul and body come back together. What does the body look like? Unclear. Is it a body that we would recognize as a body today? I don't know. But it's something called body that is going to reconnect with the soul. And most authorities, and the Ramban Nachmanides is one, although he does acknowledge that this idea is not as simple as it first sounds, but that there is going to be that resurrection of the dead is the final state. It's that there's going to be the end world, whatever that is going to be human beings with body and soul. There's even a midrash that talks about there's a kind of judgment that happens when body and soul are reunited. Why? Because what's going to happen? The soul is off wherever it is. We'll call it the world of souls. The soul is in the world of souls. The body is dust in the ground.
Mhm.
So let's say you're going to have a judgment about the life of the person after they've passed on. So you're going to bring the soul to judgment, and you're going to say, look at all these things that you did. And the soul's going to say, look, I hear you, but I couldn't have done any of it without the body. I wouldn't have even wanted to do any of it without the body, but I can't. I couldn't. I have no mobility in the physical world. My mobility in the physical world is only because of the body. And then, so you can't be blaming me for what happened. You go talk to the body. So they go talk to the body, and the body says, look, I'm just clay. Without the soul, I'm nothing. I'm just clay. So you have to put them back together again in order for there to be judgment over what happened in this lifetime. It's going to have to be a judgment that happens with body and soul together. Whenever you talk about this stuff, whatever angle you approach it from, you're only getting part of the story. And if you look at it from another angle, you have to start again because nothing makes sense. But when you're talking about the next world, and when you're talking about, you're just extrapolating from a few pieces of data that we have, and it can sort of do pretty well, just like, you know, a paleontologist can do pretty well telling you about the life of a T-Rex or something. But they're really what they're doing is they're working off a few pieces of data and doing a lot of extrapolating, and Havdil Elef Alfei Abdullos to make 1 million separations. That is what's going on with this too. We have a few pieces of data and we are extrapolating from it. But these are, so from our data, there is some kind of need for body and soul to come back together. And that somehow the human is not complete without body and soul. This is not just to judge mankind, because according to against most people's understanding of resurrection of the dead, that which is called Tchias HaMetim, resurrection of the dead, most people's understanding of it is that that is the ideal, that's what's going to happen, and that's what's going to continue. Once resurrection happens, it's just going to continue. Then there's not going to be death anymore. The Rambam is the one person who holds out. He says there's going to be resurrection, but then there's going to be death, and then it's just going to be the soul. So there's going to be resurrection in between. But according to most other people, no, resurrection is, so you may say, this stuff is so esoteric. It sounds like angels dancing on the head of a pin or kind of conversation, but it does make a difference as far as our conversation here. Because if you believe that the human being is not a whole entity without body and soul together, then body is not just a wrapper. It's not just a wrapper. It's a partner. It may be a junior partner, but it's a necessary partner. It is not, it may help to explain this kind of language. Avram is buried there. Is all of Avram buried there? No, but it's not a mistake to say Avram's buried there. If I have a winter coat and I threw it out in the garbage, I'm not in the garbage. The coat is in the garbage. Nobody's mistaking the coat for me. But if the body is not just a coat, if the body is somehow a partner in existence, in what is the human being, it would make sense to use this language. What would the Rambam say about this? Even, by the way, even Onkelos, there's an Aramaic translation of Onkelos. This is a very ancient translation of the Torah. This goes back to Roman times. It's like 2,000 years old. This is one of the oldest. This is the oldest translation of the Torah. And every translation is also a commentary. And Onkelos is like reliable. The Rambam even mentions this in his guide, that the Onkelos is reliable, that he tries to stay away from anthropomorphizing things. And in other words, he tries to protect against misunderstanding when it comes to attributing physical characteristics to the spiritual or vice versa. But he also says, "Ubasar kain kovar Avram yos Sarah itse b'maras chakal kafelta." Even after that, Avram buried Sarah, his wife, in the cave. In our other one, at the end of Chai Sarah here. Shama Kubar. So that's in verse 10. Taman it kabar, Avram v'Sarah it say. There is buried Avram and Sarah, his wife. So I'm suggesting to you that this statement makes sense if you see the body as not just a wrapper or a vessel, that the body is a kind of partner with the soul, and that the soul alone is also not me. The soul alone is also not me. There are several young men who I studied with for several years, and now they're in yeshiva. Two of them are in Israel. One of them's in YU. But I remember one of the first times we had a shmooze. It was several years ago. It was at a cholent shmooze, and it dawned on me that they didn't realize that they are their soul, that their soul is them. They thought they are their body, and that the soul is something, spiritual that they have, but they didn't identify the soul as them. And I just couldn't believe it. I just was like, I couldn't even sleep that night. I was like texting them in the middle of the night that I cannot believe that you went through all these years of your life not realizing that your soul is you. I don't want to step away from that. We are our soul. We are a soul having a physical experience. We are, and when we don't remember that, it's like a part of us has fallen asleep and just forgotten who we are. We are a soul having a physical experience, but it's not absolute. In other words, the body is not nothing. If the body was nothing, why do we treat it the way we do? Look at the fact that we make such an effort to bury and to do it with dignity and to treat the place with such respect is an indication that we think that the body's more than just a mere wrapper. Now, I have seen places where they explain that too, where they'll say that the body, the reason we bury the body is because it was a vessel for something sacred. And since the body was a vessel for something sacred, we have to treat it with respect, that's a good explanation. That's a good explanation. And I've heard Rabbi Rosner quote Rabbi Soloveitchik, Rabbi Yosef Dov Soloveitchik, a blessed memory, as saying that it's not just that it's a vessel for something sacred, but it's a vessel for Torah. Because something that was like a vessel for Torah needs to be buried. Like a mitzvah object doesn't need to be buried necessarily. If you have a lulav, it doesn't have to be buried. But a Torah or a mezuzah or tefillin, things that have sacred writing on it, which are called davar shebekdusha, a sanctified thing that comes from sacred writing, and even the something that is not the sacred writing itself, but even like the wooden handles of the Torah, the Eitz Chaims, those wooden handles of the Torah are also supposed to be put in a geniza. They're supposed to be buried. So he suggests that the body is like that the body is treated sacredly because it was a vessel for something sacred. But it can't only be that. It can't only be that, because they are not saying that. It's not saying it here. It's saying Avram and Sarah are buried there. If you went to Maras Machpelah, when you go to Maras Machpelah, that's what people say. When you go to Maras Machpelah today, people say, this is where Avram and Sarah are buried. This is where Yitzchak and Rivka are buried. This is where Avram and where Yaakov and Leah are buried. This is where Adam and Chava are buried, according to tradition. But so, in other words, we do not think of it merely as a vessel. It's not less than a vessel, but we don't only think of it as a vessel. And certainly, according to almost every opinion, except for the Rambam, certainly according to almost every opinion, there is something essentially important about the body when it comes to human identity. I am somehow not just my soul. I am my soul together with my body. My body is a kind of junior partner in this. Man is the combination of body and soul. God fashions him from the earth and blows into his nostrils the spirit of life. That combination is the human being. It's not the soul alone, and it's not the body alone.
But if one's body turns back into dust,
yeah,
what's left? The bones? There is nothing.
Right.
So I have an argument here on your resurrection theory.
Yeah.
The argument is if there is resurrection of quote man and body,
yeah,
aren't you going back and having Adam recreated again?
Maybe there is some.
How else would you come back as a body if that God goes ahead and says, "I will create a body and blow in the body"?
Right. These questions, by the way, there are many. There are hundreds of questions that arise with the thing of resurrection. I'll just tell you, Aryeh Kaplan he wrote an article suggesting it could be cloning. That a person you could clone a body,
okay,
and thereby, as long as you have some element of the DNA of the person, there could be a way that you could eventually clone the body, and then you'd have the body ready, and then you would just need a soul. It's one of the issues he suggests with cremation, it could be one of the problems with cremation, that there wouldn't be any DNA left. But then what would you do for the people that were cremated against their will, terribly throughout Jewish history? And, he has to have stuff back and forth. But this spawns, a wealth of discussion. But I just want to suggest that from our parsha, there seems to be evidence that we are not just the soul. There may be people who read the Torah and they don't even know where you see the soul in it.
Yeah,
Clearly,
Rabbi, when
yeah.
Hashem says to Adam, he's, from dust you came and to dust you will return. He doesn't
There
say
you
the
go.
breath I breathed into you will go somewhere else.
Right. He doesn't. You're right. Why doesn't he discuss? And there are many, also, there is no discussion of what happens after we die or what happened before we were born. And those are, I say, visit the museum of things you would expect to find in the Torah, but do not. And you will find that many of these questions that you're asking are supported in comfort by people who understand you and are willing to listen. As you probe those questions about why doesn't the Torah want to talk about what happens to the soul after we die?
Are there subtle differences between how the nature of the soul is taught or described between like Hasidish and Yeshivish, or if they?
I would say just
and
experientially.
You wouldn't have to expound on this. I'm just
I
curious if
would
there are
say-
differences.
I would say that in yeshiva, we mostly are exposed to like Derech Hashem, who's a more mechanical kind of explanation of the soul. And I was not educated that Jews have a different type of soul than Gentiles. Intrinsically different. But in Tanya, it makes a big deal out of that there is there's a special kind of aspect of the soul that is different for Jews as opposed to non-Jews. And so I would say that was taught different to me. Now, it wasn't necessarily that anybody in the yeshiva world believes differently, but it was never taught to me. And there were certain mystical teachings that are taught in a particular way in Hasidus that might be a little bit different than it's in the yeshivish thing. But I think for the most part, it's the same. It's all the same. Again, when you're reading things about the soul, obviously you have to take it, because again, they're extrapolating from a few pieces of data. But even you could ask a few questions, and these few questions already make it clear you just don't have enough information. Like, for instance, there's it says after the soul dies, it hovers with the body. You'll see this kind of thing. The soul sort of hovers with the body for a few days, or stays near the grave, or the soul after death. The soul, there's an option. The soul could end up possibly in experience called Gehenna, or the soul could go straight to the world of souls. If it does go to Gehenna, a wicked person would go to Gehenna for a year. So we only say Kaddish for 11 months because we don't want to suggest that the person we're saying Kaddish for would have been in Gehenna for like a year. So what does this even mean? Because once the soul is not connected to the body, how is it subject to time in the way we're connected to time? It's not so when you start talking about what happens to the soul over a period of time, so you already know you're getting into a weird place. So there's just not enough information. We're going to some place where we don't have enough information. But but Lois's question, that you just see there's so many places where we would expect the discussion of soul to come up, and again, also the discussion of what happens after we die. You'd expect it to come up in all sorts of places, and there's just quiet. That is one of the great questions about the Torah.
And Rabbi, that Abraham, it says he was gathered unto his fathers. Now, what can
Right.
that mean? What can that mean? It doesn't mean he was buried with his fathers, because Terach wasn't at Hebron,
Right. Yeah, so I have pointed that out to people who are looking for an indication of the belief in an afterlife. There are many indications in the Torah that there was a belief in the afterlife, but I have pointed to that. Although I will say, for complete transparency, that I heard this from tour guides who wanted to say that the meaning of this phrase is, but you're right in the Avram one, but typically the meaning of the phrase "to be gathered to your fathers" would mean that your bones, because you'd have a family crypt, and your bones, what they would do is they bury you in the ground for a while till you're just bones, and then they gather the bones and they put them on a shelf. And they wanted to say that gathered unto your fathers would mean that your bones are brought to your fathers. But as Lois is pointing out, this is a new cave. His fathers are not in it, right? So yes, there are other places. There are quite a few places where there seemed to be an indication of that there is a world, that there is life after death or something after death, but there's not a discussion about it. There's certainly not a thorough discussion about it, and that's one of those questions. But that's not the only one. There's quite a few places in the Torah that indicate that there was a belief, and certainly in Tanakh, that there was a belief, even a belief in resurrection of the dead. There are verses that use language that suggests resurrection of the dead, but without explanation for it, for what it might be. I'm already responding to not the teachings that come from the Torah. I'm responding to the teachings as we discuss them. And from the teachings, from our perspective, the soul, obviously the existence of the soul is taken for granted, and there's lots of detail about the soul that we talk about, to the point where the question is, what's the body? And to the point where some people are suggesting, maybe many people are suggesting, that the body is just a vessel or a wrapper. And I'm suggesting that the language in this parsha suggests otherwise, that the body is not just a wrapper or a vessel, that the body is the person to some degree. It may not have to be the whole person, but they are the person to some degree. All righty. As with many mysterious things, we are in some ways more confused now than we were before. But at least we got to share it together, right?
Yes.
Be well, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Rabbi. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. And again, from everybody here to everybody there, be well.
Thank you. Bye.
You're welcome. Bye.